All right. All right. So, almost hit my desk. Okay. So, here we are at 8 o'clock. Good evening to all of you. I'm Danilo Evangelista. Welcome to our live Hurricane Beryl update as of 8 o'clock. Lots that happened today with Beryl, and certainly lots more that's going to happen with Beryl. It is an extraordinary storm that I just felt like we had to do as much coverage as we could today. So I posted 3 videos, and I'm likely going to do the same or very similar. Maybe we'll change things up. I'm probably going to do I think an afternoon live stream instead of an evening live stream that like I'm doing tonight. But we have a lot to go over with Beryl. It continues to intensify, and I did this stream mainly to really be able to go over the 8 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go over the 8 p.m. We're going to go over some of the latest model guidance. Let me really quickly put this stream, though, on YouTube so we could get more people to watch. Let's really quickly do it. So we got to post this on YouTube right now. 8 p.m. Hurricane Beryl. Okay, there we go. Should get hopefully some other people to watch me. By the way, if you're not following me on Twitter yet, at Danilo Evangelista, definitely recommend that you follow me because look at all the information I post throughout the day. I'm really active on Twitter, and I plan to be so over the next several days, of course, as we continue to track Hurricane Beryl. So we have that. We also have Beryl right now, which continues to rapidly intensify. As I was saying this evening, as of the latest National Hurricane Center advisory, it is 80 miles per hour. I'm just trying to get my thoughts together. But it is 80 miles per hour as of the latest National Hurricane Center advisory. Let's actually start and go over what we have with Beryl right now. As of 8 p.m., it is 80 miles per hour, 990 millibars with a minimum central pressure, so it continues to deepen over the eastern tropical Atlantic. It is located, if you're tracking it, it is located at 10.2 north and 50.3 west, so it is now across the longitude line of 50 west. And it's also gaining a little bit of latitude as well. I think it was below 10 north earlier today. And it is now at 10.2 north, so it is starting to gain a little bit of latitude, but it'll only barely gain latitude over the next several days, as it's generally going to remain on a west / maybe very slightly west-northwest track as it gets closer to the Windward Islands. And it is moving right now west at 22 miles per hour as we get closer to the island. So that's Beryl. And their latest headline is Beryl is forecast to intensify quickly into a major hurricane, and it is expected to bring life-threatening winds and storm surge to the Windward Islands starting tomorrow night. So if you are in the Windward Islands, if you're in especially places like Barbados, which is under a hurricane warning right now, and let's actually take a look at the public advisory to see areas that are under hurricane warnings right now, and it is Barbados. Actually, they've added new places now for hurricane warnings. It is Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadine Islands, and Grenada. A tropical storm warning is now in effect for Martinique and Tobago, and there's a tropical storm watch still in effect for Dominica. So if you're in all of these areas, keep in mind for impacts, especially if you're in the hurricane warned area, start preparing right now, as we are about to see hurricane impacts, or at least tropical storm force winds should begin tomorrow night, and we will see hurricane impacts likely through Monday as Beryl moves through. So we have that. We also have the hazards as well, which we're all going to go over later, but I think we should get it out of the way right now. storm surge is expected to be 5 to 7 feet above the normal, 5 to 7 feet. Sometimes I get my words mixed up. I don't know why, but storm surge is expected to be 5 to 7 feet above normal tide levels in areas of onshore flow near where Beryl makes landfall in the hurricane warning and watch area. And this will especially be felt near the coast because that's where the waves will be the largest. So if you're near the coast, especially in these islands, really prepare, evacuate inland, a little further inland if you can, and try to avoid the coastline, and definitely do so now, as once again, tropical storm force conditions are expected probably within the next 24 to 36 hours, I should say, as Beryl is going to make its closest approach. So this is the latest satellite image of Beryl. You could see convective bursts still persistent around the core, and recently within the last few frames they've now switched over to curling convective bursts. This is suggestive that Beryl is now fully wrapped up in its core completely, which means that its eye wall is probably now completely consolidating. And you also see we have these curling convective bursts with multiple, not just one of them occurring now. You can see a new one beginning to pop up. And I also have this other satellite image of Beryl. It's basically the same thing. It's the long wave IR satellite, but this is the mesoscale sector. So this actually looks at bursts this is a frame every 30 seconds of Beryl. This satellite image updates every 10 minutes. So this is going to get us really all of the latest images of Beryl right as they happen. And you can see, yeah, we have convective bursts going on that are curling around the eye or the eye wall of this storm. And this is absolutely a sign of a strengthening hurricane, because this represents, once again, the eye wall is closing, it is consolidating, and very soon, usually after we see these kind of bursts occur, the storm strengthens further, and eventually this will help it strengthen and go on to become a major hurricane like it is expected to. And you can see that very clearly in the National Hurricane Center forecast. They have a major hurricane expected. This is the 5 p.m. cone. The cone only updates at 5 and 11 every 6 hours, so not quite updated yet. But the cone is right now major hurricane expected by Monday morning, but given its satellite presentation, and let me actually update it for the 8 p.m., and you can actually see all the updated watches and warnings, but given that we're already at 80 miles an hour, and we have a satellite presentation like this where we're getting a bunch of these curling bands going on within the storm, really wouldn't shock me in the least if we actually get this to potentially become a major hurricane sometime tomorrow. Earlier than what all the model guidance has. They really only have this becoming a major hurricane tomorrow night into Monday as this approaches the islands. Wouldn't shock me in the least, though, if it does so earlier. And then after that, it moves through the Eastern Caribbean. I think the National Hurricane Center expects the peak to occur while it's traversing the Eastern Caribbean. And then after that, things will become a little bit less favorable for it in the Central and Western Caribbean. But that is also where the uncertainty begins to expand. And that's when we really need to watch to see what Beryl does after it moves into the Eastern Caribbean, because what it is as a storm, as it's moving through the islands, will really, really impact what its track will be down the line. And we'll go over that in more detail. But actually, just as I mentioned, the spread really begins to open up in the model guidance as we head after the 72-hour mark. We have some solutions like the H-Wharf, they take it further north. A lot of the solutions, though, right now staying a little bit further south, potentially this moving into the central Western Caribbean, and at least in the long range, they have this impacting the Yucatan Peninsula. But I think they are pretty certain right now that this will probably move through the Eastern Caribbean after it gets into the islands, and it looks like it'll generally remain on a west-northwestward track. Doesn't seem like it's going to do anything much more than that, unless if this does end up becoming a stronger system, in which we will probably see more of a shift north, I would believe. That's the general idea that I'm getting from the model guidance, is that the further the stronger it is on approach to the islands, the further north it'll probably be, and the more of these greater Antilles islands, especially Hispaniola, so places like Dominican Republic is, and especially the Haiti portion of the island of Hispaniola, that'll probably put them in much greater risk. Jamaica will probably be at a much greater risk, especially if we see shifts north. If if this storm is stronger, and that would especially mean more concern as well, for Cuba. So we have that. We have the model guidance. It is very uncertain right now. Um, let's see what exactly the models show. So I don't want to show that. That's the Canadian model. Not really going to look at the Canadian model right now, but you could see, over the next 12 to 24 hours, GFS expects further strengthening, and then there it is on approach to the islands at hour 48. This is Monday afternoon. Crosses the islands at 964 millibars, so that's probably a Category 2 to Category 3 hurricane. And then the GFS seems to weaken this a little bit, but then they kind of lower this back down in the pressure, and then they kind of bring this, I think in the last run. Let's actually see the comparison from the last run. So this is the 18Z. Let's look at the 12Z. Yeah, 12Z had this further north, and they also had this much weaker, although that's probably because it went over Jamaica. But the 18Z keeps it south, and then it moves it along into the Western Caribbean. And then this is roughly 5 days out. It looks like a big threat will probably be for the Yucatan, instead of points north than that. And then you could also see behind the GFS, behind Beryl, you could see that we have, the area behind Beryl on the National Hurricane Center. So it is this area right here, and I'll go over this separately tomorrow when we get more information about it. It's not an invest yet, although it wouldn't shock me if it becomes an area of invest very soon, and the next number would be 96L, so it wouldn't shock me if we get this to be future 96L very soon. We're going to have to watch this area, after we get done with Beryl and it moves through the Caribbean islands, because it looks like on the GFS run, they make it impact the Lesser Antilles as well, and potentially as a stronger system as well. Not as strong as Beryl will be, or hopefully not. Otherwise, that would be really, that would really be an interesting scenario. But they make this, a decently strong tropical system heading into the islands once again. And that occurs around mid to late next week. Looks like the GFS has an impact around Thursday, and then they bring that into the Caribbean. And then 5 days out, it's also in the Eastern Caribbean once again. And I'd imagine this time it looks a lot more like a threat for the northern and eastern islands, rather than where it looks like Beryl will probably be something that we need to watch for, the further west in the Caribbean that you go. But in terms of United States impacts, it looks way too uncertain right now, because as we get past 5 days, let's actually really quickly just to see what happens on the GFS. Yeah, actually the GFS does actually make this, into a Texas landfall once it gets past the Yucatan. It also intensifies this as well, over the Gulf. I mean, the Gulf of Mexico is very warm, so that doesn't shock me at all. But this is all past 5 days, and especially when it comes to the world of tropical tracking, especially in a situation like Beryl, which is, changed by the hour. I mean, I don't think any of us would have expected Beryl to be a hurricane, and an intensifying one at the rate that it is right now. I think this early. So it is definitely a shock that we have that happening. But it's going to continue. Looks like 5 days. That's where the spread really, occurs. The GFS has a little bit of a weaker solution. I mean, it is generally more in consensus with most of the model guidance. A lot of them have this kind of taking it right through the Caribbean into the Western Caribbean like that, and kind of bending back a little bit more towards the west. The European too, I think, also shows it in a very similar place. Yes, it does, at hour 126. European does, though, actually The European does seem to be a little bit slower, though. I mean, this is the 12Z run, actually, so it would probably show it in a very similar place. But the European as well, as of the 12Z, I went over this earlier. European also makes this a hurricane as it approaches the islands, and then seems like, as I mentioned earlier with the National Hurricane Center forecast, it seems like this moves into the Eastern Caribbean, and just after the islands, once again, is when it reaches its peak intensity, probably. And then the European shows something very similar to the GFS, brings this into the Eastern Caribbean, kind of gets very close to Jamaica. So I will say, since it's starting to get a little bit closer in time, I think Jamaica should especially watch out for whatever happens with Beryl afterwards. And then they kind of bring this in a trajectory that kind of goes a little bit more west and probably a lot more down the line as a Yucatan threat. So that's what the European shows. And then, by the way, what they show with the wave behind Beryl. So this area that's a 3070 right now, they don't really develop that. They're not really enthused into that storm as much as the GFS is. The GFS is showing a hurricane once again for the islands, which that would really be a headache to deal with, especially coming off the fact that Beryl will be a major hurricane, not just a hurricane, as it gets into the islands. But once again, we'll have to see. Maybe the European will probably latch onto it later on. Let's actually see what the EC fast shows as of the 0Z. Actually doesn't really even go that far out anyways. So that's not really much of a help at all. See what the European shows in the Caribbean. 986 millibars. It's definitely on the weaker side. The European, though, does have a little bit of a resolution issue. So maybe it's not really able to pick up. I know that's an issue, that the European is not really able to pick up intensification, especially of small storms as well. So I would kind of disregard the intensity aspects of the European at this point, especially given that we're already at 80 miles per hour and 990 millibars. So this sort of solution from the European, that it's only 988 millibars, it seems like, yeah, it's only 988 millibars. This is the 18Z run. It's only 988 as it enters the islands. I would just throw that out immediately. So that's the European. What about the H-Wharf? Let's see what the H-Wharf shows in terms of it. And the H-Wharf is a perfect example, I would say, of a storm that is a lot more on the northern tier of the forecast, because the H-Wharf is definitely the most aggressive in terms of intensity out of all of the models. And I'll show you right now, it takes this into the islands as a major hurricane, basically as a Category 4 storm as it's crossing the islands as of the 18Z. And it seems like it's actually trended a little bit quicker in the H-Wharf. So it takes this through the islands as a Category 4, intensifies this further in the Eastern Caribbean, and then it kind of goes south of Jamaica. So that's actually a little different than last run, when it was right over the northern part of Jamaica, and then it continued and it ended up being just south of Cuba, and generally on the northernmost tier. Actually, you can see it here on the model track guidance. The H-Wharf was on the northernmost tier of the model spread from the 12Z. So let me see. This is actually the 18Z, and this run looks more like the 12Z than the 18Z, and not quite sure what that is, but generally the H-Wharf 2 on the 18Z run seems to be a little bit further south. But in general, I'd say it really depends on how strong the storm is, especially especially how strong it gets in the Eastern Caribbean. And I'd say in general for everybody in Jamaica, Haiti, and even Cuba should watch out with Beryl the most right now. I think that's the biggest area that we need to watch for with Beryl, past the islands. But in terms of what the impacts it will bring to the islands, I think it is very self-explanatory, given that it is a major hurricane impact. And this is the key messages for it. Just had to really quickly refresh it, and just to see if they have updated key messages for 8 o'clock. Seems like they don't. But Beryl, the main key message is Beryl is expected to become a dangerous major hurricane when it reaches the Windward Islands late Sunday night or Monday morning, or Monday, the morning part, but Monday, bringing destructive heavy hurricane force winds and life-threatening storm surge, and a hurricane watch and warning are in effect for much of the Windward Islands. And what we're going to go over in this next slide, heavy rainfall and localized flooding is expected across the Windward Islands Sunday night and Monday. And interests in the Central and Western Caribbean should monitor the progress of the system. And this is the biggest part that I think we should highlight right now, is users are reminded that there is a large uncertainty at days 4 and 5, and not to focus on the specific details of the track or intensity, because if you look once again at the model spread, especially as we get past day 3, it begins to open up significantly. It's not like where it is when it's passing through the Caribbean that all the models converge on basically the same track as it is entering the islands. It's not like here. This is where it has a lot more agreement. A lot of the models agree a lot more on where it will be as it's impacting the islands, although even that, a slight change will make a lot of a difference, given that Beryl is a very small storm, and it'll really change depending on what island that you are in. Will depend on what kind of impacts you get. But as we get further than that, the model guidance begins to spread, and there's a lot more uncertainty on whether or not this will go a little bit further north, or this will probably be a little bit further south and be, once again, another Central American threat. So we'll have to see what exactly Beryl does. A lot in the air, especially as we get past the next 60 hours or so. It's really going to depend. And once again, I'll continue to emphasize, what Beryl does within the next 60 hours will really depend on what its track and even intensity will be in the future. And interests, honestly, anywhere from the Yucatan in Central America, even especially up to the Gulf Coast, because I know especially there are a lot of people curious as to what will happen with Beryl in terms of Gulf Coast impacts, um, especially given the last several years along the Gulf Coast. It's really been tiring, I can absolutely imagine. So everybody is curious to know what exactly Beryl is going to do um, as it heads into the Caribbean. Is it going to go north, and will that put the Gulf Coast in a lot more of a threat down the long term, sort of blanking out? Will it being further north be a lot more of a long term threat for the Gulf Coast, or is it going to be the model guidance that they show right now, which is generally goes a little bit north, but then as it gets towards the Western Caribbean, it starts to go further west, and that looks like a lot more as a Central American impact rather than a Northern Gulf Coast impact. There's a lot, fork in the road, really. Lots of uncertainty. It could go one way or another, and that's really going to depend on what Beryl does as it heads into the Eastern Caribbean. So we have that. But what about the impacts in the current time as Beryl enters the Caribbean and impacts the Windward Islands? It's going to be the rainfall. It's going to be the rainfall. It's going to be the strong winds, especially given that it will be a powerful storm. Rainfall will probably be anywhere from 4 to 6 inches. Some areas will probably see locally more, especially if you're in the St. Vincent area. Barbados too, expecting 4 to 6 inches. Seems like especially on the southern side of the island. And we'll probably see areas that are locally above 6 inches as well. And then after that, the rest of the islands looking like they could potentially get at least 2 to 4 inches throughout most of the rest of the islands, even extending as far north as Antigua too. Could get rainfall from this, and then especially it's really going to depend on how north or south Beryl deviates, but this will also be a heavy rainfall threat regardless of whether or not we'll even see a landfall from Beryl. It'll be a rainfall threat for Haiti and Dominican Republic as well. So lots of impacts to keep in mind with Beryl. It's not just the fact that this is a potentially major hurricane that'll impact the islands. Let's really quickly take a look at the wind speed probability. So let me put this in a new tab. I gotta do this. There we go. The wind speed for Beryl. And it looks like the island of biggest threat will be once again around St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados. They those areas seem to have a 80 to 90% chance that there will be tropical storm force winds. So very much likelihood that we will get tropical storm force winds in those areas. And then areas that look like they'll have at least a 50-50 shot will probably be, I think this is Grenada, between Grenada and St. Lucia. And then I'm not sure what this island to the north is over here. Let me look at this map. It's Martinique. So I think generally between Martinique and Grenada are the biggest areas that will potentially get tropical storm force winds, or it's at least a 50-50 shot that they will see tropical storm force winds for the storm. Anywhere north and south of that obviously needs to keep a close eye on how Beryl, progresses, although I will say this South American part, I'm not really entirely sure that you folks in South America, especially Venezuela, need to be too concerned about Beryl, but obviously it's good to keep an eye out just in case. But um, after that, it also seems like potentially Jamaica too, and even the southern portions of Haiti and the Dominican Republic seems to have potentially up to at least a 50-50 shot of getting tropical storm force winds, but that is past the day 3 mark, so I'm not quite sure we'll see watches and warnings just yet, but I'm pretty sure, especially over the next day or so, I'd imagine we'll start seeing a lot more watches and warnings being issued, not only for the islands, but probably make their way into the Caribbean as well, especially once Beryl crosses the Windward Islands too. So let's take a look at the hurricane force probability as well, because they have that too. And the hurricane force winds they're obviously not as large, or they don't have as high as a percent, because Beryl is going to be even smaller. It's already going to be a compact storm, but its hurricane force wind speed will be even smaller, which is why I'm saying that depending on what island you're in is going to depend on what impacts you'll get because of how small the center, the core of the storm will be. And in fact, it really looks like it's going to be St. Vincent and the Grenadines, at least in the hurricane force wind speed probability, that gets the highest risk. There's also Grenada up into St. Lucia that has anywhere from probably a 10 to 20 to even 30% chance. But areas that are higher than a 30% chance, that really seems to be confined to St. Lucia, maybe Grenada, and then maybe Barbados as well, that has the highest risk. And I think that's where the hurricane warnings are in effect. Anyways, let me really quickly check as of the 8 p.m. Yeah, and they actually include, and they actually no, they're actually all in effect for only these areas that. Let me really quickly find the map. Oh, I lost it. Oh, here it is. Lost it for a second, but I found it again. The National Hurricane Center outlined mainly these areas that Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and there's also Barbados. Those are the areas that seem to be under the highest risk for hurricane force wind speeds. And obviously, those are the areas that the National Hurricane Center is monitoring at this time. And because of that, they have hurricane warnings in effect for those areas. So that's generally in a sum up what the 8 p.m. advisory shows for Beryl right now. So I will once again recommend, if you're in these islands, please start your hurricane preparations now. Really don't recommend that you wait till the last minute, because You don't want that extra stress of waiting till the last minute to get your hurricane preparations done. It's really, especially with something that there's so much fear and hype surrounding this, I really think you should have your hurricane preparations done now and extra attention focused on watching the progress of how Beryl plays out, because it's really going to depend on how much it's able to organize over the next several hours. And let's actually see the latest satellite loops. Let me really quickly reload them, and you can see, continue to see these convective bursts going, and it's really going to depend on how much these convective bursts are able to wrap around and wrap in and into until where we start seeing an eye wall uh, begin to form. So it's really going to depend on what Beryl does over the next several hours, and we'll see what we wake up to tomorrow morning when we see Beryl. We'll see what we wake up to tomorrow morning with that. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them down below. I'll try to answer them. Really not feeling well. All right. Let me see if there's any questions, comments, or concerns. If not, I'll end it right here. And that is generally the look that we have with Beryl right now. All right, so I'm going to wait a few more minutes and see what we have. All right, doesn't seem like there's much of any concern, so I'm going to end it right here. With that being said, if you're in the islands, once again, watch the progress of Beryl really closely. See what we wake up to tomorrow morning with its intensity, and yeah, we'll see. We'll see what this storm is. Once again, the National Hurricane Center is expecting a major hurricane out of this storm. 120 miles per hour is the peak, and we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, with that being said, I'm going to end it off for tonight. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. If you like what you saw tonight, if you really found this stream informative, I would really like it and appreciate it if you give it a like. Subscribe if you're new as well and you want more updates. I'm going to try to post as many videos throughout the day tomorrow into tomorrow night, and also throughout the next several days as well, as Beryl traverses the Caribbean. So we're going to be on this journey together, monitoring Beryl. It's definitely going to be a long one, but trust me, we'll be here together, and I'll definitely try to post as many videos throughout the week. So with that being said, stay safe, peace, love, and kindness to you all, and we will talk again tomorrow.